Alright, what's going on, guys? Today I've got some really fascinating stuff for you. If you guys have been watching this series so far, I mentioned in the last video how the majority of the findings going forward are going to be things that go beyond the game. Discoveries that reference external sources and can only be understood fully in context of real world things. And the discoveries I have for you today are going to range from very small to principles that fundamentally change the story of characters that we look at. But before we dive into those today, I have to mention that 95% of you guys that have been watching this series so far are not subscribed, so if you don't mind, go ahead and hit that button. I'm sure you'll enjoy the rest of my content. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into it. We're gonna start with a pretty small one today, but did you know that Selluvis is actually trying to help us fight Radahn, and actively participates in the festival, although indirectly? Now, I never personally made this connection, but I think it's really cool because I always wondered why the Finger Maiden that we can summon in the fight, even though she's not a spirit, never says a word to us. Well, that's because she's actually one of Selluvis's puppets. If you venture down into Selluvis's lair, you can actually find her puppet discarded along with the rest. Now, you can make the argument that they just used the same model, but we can actually prove that's who it is. Because after completing Selluvis's quest, you can actually buy the same puppet of Finger Maiden Theralina. No, I'm not gonna lie, she's probably one of the worst summons in the entire game, but I do think it's cool that among the million reasons to hate Selluvis, he actually does come through at least one time. Now, this next one is pretty crazy. I had known about a few of these, but there's several times throughout the map of Elden Ring where you can sequence break by triggering Stakes of Marika through walls and using it to get to inaccessible areas from where you currently are in the game. Now, I'm really not a fan of glitches, but user Brilliant Pear over on Reddit found one of these sequence breaks that I think is actually super useful if you want to craft a unique build early on. But what this allows you to do is completely bypass Ranni's questline and get the Darkmoon Greatsword early on in the game. Now, in order to do this, you need to have the Bloody Slash Ash of War and climb the hill until you get to this spot right here. But the goal here is that by using the Bloody Slash Ash of War, it triggers your character death while being partially clipped through the wall. Now, if you do it right, it'll put you in range to activate the Stake of Marika in the Moonlight Altar. But what is absolutely wild about this is that you can make your way over to the spot where Ranni's quest ends, and it'll trigger all the events as if you've done all of the quest steps. You don't even have to have the ring that you're supposed to put on your finger. Now, obviously this will break the quest and automatically put you at the end of it, so you won't be able to do any of the steps prior. But it is kind of crazy that you can just go all the way here and get the Darkmoon Greatsword and completely skip everything involved. And you can do this literally as soon as you get Torrent and Bloody Slash. So that's really interesting to say the least. Next, we're going to be talking about some really mind-blowing stuff. Some findings that I only hope I can communicate properly, and that I definitely can't explain in just a few minutes. But what we're going to be looking at is some of the scientific explanation for the gravity magic in the game. And the majority of this comes from Quaylag, and I'll have her channel linked down below. Definitely check out her original video on this if you find it interesting. But to begin our discussion on this, we need to take a look at some of the symbology involved with gravity magic. Because if we take a look at the sigil used when casting gravity spells, a lot of people assumed it was based on the depiction of a gravitational field. However, a gravitational field is depicted by a center of mass, and the force pulling other objects towards its core. So this isn't actually the case. What the sigil is actually based on is a magnetic field of a planetary body. Now, you may think that's just some cool trivia, but it actually ties in quite a bit with a lot of other theories going around in the game. Because if you haven't noticed, the core theme of Elden Ring is built on the idea of opposites, specifically regression and causality. Now, I'm not going to explain that idea here simply because I don't have enough time, but what I found interesting is that the spells Radahn uses, specifically his swords, rely on the idea of magnetism, and you'll notice that his swords create a sense of electricity, because one sword has a positive charge while the other has a negative charge. This is why one spell brings the enemies in, and the follow-up attack releases the built-up electricity. This is why the gravity magic spells that don't use rocks or meteorites only seem to act in attraction or repulsion. Now, spells relating to meteorites or rock behave a little bit differently, and that's probably a reference to the fact that a lot of the meteorites that impact Earth are made of iron, and they build their own magnetic charge. But there is another type of gravity magic that actually does rely on gravity, and you'll notice that these spells don't have that electrical tinge to them. That's because these are the result of an electromagnetic field, creating ripples of gravity in the space-time affected by that field. And the spell that illustrates this the best is Waves of Darkness that you get from Estelle. You'll notice that when the spell is cast, the electricity appears on the weapon because we're creating a strong magnetic field. And when the energy and momentum of the magnetic field are released, it creates waves in gravity that are noticeably absent of this electromagnetic charge, but instead dissipate cosmic energy in the space around it. Up next, did you know that the lightning-wielding dragons of Elden Ring derive their names from Latin origin? Now, this is just a little bit of trivia, but I thought it was cool nonetheless. The dragons with names ending in AX all have very fitting Latin prefixes that describe their behavior in the game. The first of these dragons that we might see, Fortisax, is built on the prefix Fortis, and with Fortisax being the protector of Godwyn even in death, it's fitting that the word means strong or brave. The next dragon, Lanciax, seems to be spelled a little bit differently, but the prefix that fits this name is likely Lancia, which quite literally means lance or spear. And there is a couple ways this can be interpreted, because Lanciax commonly uses the lightning as a spear, but it could also be referring to the behavior of the dragon, considering that Lanciax is the only dragon that actively pursues us, and could be referred to as the spearhead of the group. The next dragon that we might see is called Grandsax, and also suffers a bit from spelling liberties, but derives its name from the prefix Grandis, which can mean big or large, and I don't think we really have to go into why that's a fitting name, because well, he's just really big. But the final lightning-wielding dragon that we'll meet on our journey is Placidusax, whose name is derived from the prefix Placidus, which commonly means passive or gentle. And considering we find Placidusax waiting beyond time, in sort of a state of sleep, it's fitting exactly why he has this name. But while we're on the topic, have you ever wondered where exactly in the world this arena is? We're supposed to be fighting Placidusax somewhere beyond time, but something I haven't seen a lot of people question is the space factor. Personally, I figured this arena just existed somewhere off map, but interestingly enough, it was in front of our faces the whole time. Because if you didn't know, the arena we fight Placidusax in is actually inside the storm. Now this is really cool to me, because it's such a perfect place to hide it. With the unique skybox going on, I just think it's such a great detail, because most of the time when we see things like this, it's just underground, or the developer puts it somewhere completely inaccessible. But I don't know, to me, the fact that it makes sense from a lore perspective and they were able to achieve something like this right in front of our faces, just kind of makes me appreciate that FromSoftware attention to detail. Up next, we have something that I really hope somebody knew about, because this has been racking my brain for like a week, because nobody seems to know the correct answer for this. But what we have is some cut dialogue that sounds so interesting, but as far as I could tell, and I asked around, nobody seems to know whose dialogue this is. But let me read it to you and I'll give you my opinion on it. Young seedling, return to the bosom of the earth, but remember well, thou art mine. So shall I give of myself, this is for thee. Mine abundance, my drop of dew, quench thy thirst throughout thy frame. Blossom and burgeon time and again. Grow larger, stronger, until the day cometh, when thou canst share in my dream. Elden Ring, O Elden Ring, beget order most elegant from my tender reverie. If thou covetest the throne, impress my vision upon thine heart. In the new world of thy making, all things will flourish, whether graceful or malign. Okay, I don't know about you guys, but that sounds so much like something Nycolas would have said. And let's break this down a little bit. The first thing that whoever they're speaking to is referred as is a seedling. And there's constant use of tree and botanical metaphors here. And now we know the only person to grow a tree comparable to the Erd tree was Nycolas. And even Nycolas himself was growing himself inside the Halig tree. But there's two more things in this passage that cue Nycolas for me. The line, mine abundance. In further cut content, it's known that Nycolas' great rune was the rune of abundance. Now we don't know exactly what that constitutes, but in some way or another it was supposed to interface with Malenia's great rune. Now remember how I said the theme of the game is opposites. If Malenia's great rune is known for its rot, destroying life, then logically it would make sense for Nycolas to grow it. But the final thing that screams Nycolas for me is the line that says, until thou canst share in my dream. Now we know from the cut Asimi questline that at one point Saint Trina, the character associated with dreams in the lore, was at one point Nycolas. So my opinion on this dialogue is that it's likely part of either a cut ending revolving around Nycolas, or dialogue from a future DLC that deals with Nycolas' storyline. Because man, if there is one story in this game that I want to be fleshed out more, it's Nycolas. But let me know your thoughts on this down below. Now in a little bit less serious tone, did you ever notice that the lands between seems to look an awful lot like Pangaea? Now when I saw this, I thought this had to be the inspiration for the map. Honestly, this is one of those times where I have to say there's no way this was an accident. Now you can argue that the proportions aren't the same, but it even opens up to the water at the exact same spot. And another pretty cool find that I think connects to this is that Revian pointed out over on Twitter that two of the Crucible Knights share geological references in their names. The Silurian and Ordovician are both two Paleozoic periods, and that these took place right before the first trees emerged. And it's funny that they represent the Crucible, with it being the primordial form of the Erd Tree. But something that crossed my mind about this is that the original concept art for the map actually had a giant impact crater in the middle. I'd wager that it was supposed to be the meteorite or the star that the Elden Beast arrived on, but it definitely fits the theme to say the least. But that's gonna pretty much do it for the video today. I hope you enjoyed. If you have something you'd like to share or would like to join a community around these types of findings, definitely join the Discord link I'll have in the pinned comment below. And if I showed you something that you didn't know today, be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you're new around here. But with all that, I'll catch you in the next one.